Yes, you are consenting to your images being used and recorded and stored and being broadcast also. Right. Minutes of the meeting that was held on the 12th of September. Goodness me, long time ago. We've ordered copies of those. Can I sign those as being a true record? Thank you. Lorraine. And can I welcome, there are some faces here that you may or may not recognise. Some people are old friends of ours who do appear quite regularly. We've got Becky Harris, who will be speaking to at least two papers, I believe. And we've also got Wendy Bridgewater, who also is an old friend of ours, and Jenny Rhodes also. So we've got quite a lot of papers this afternoon, and it's quite a change from Mrs. Fowkes having to do quite a lot of the reporting on reports. So, do we have apologies, please? Sorry.
Yes, Chairman, we've got apologies from councillors Harrison, Reid and parish councillors Elder and M. Roberts.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. It's item 5. It's members' allowances, Reid parishes. We do get a parish allowance, so that I obviously have to declare an interest in that one.
And the same for me, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Allen. We'll go into item 4. Staffordshire County Council elections. As you are all aware, I would imagine, we have elections coming up in May 2025. And so we have a report from Becky Harris on the preparations for the County Council elections. Thank you. Becky?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So yeah, as promised at the last Standards and Resource Committee, we promised to bring a bit of an update back to you on the County Council elections. And it is now unbelievably only 98 days away till the 1st of May. So it's probably fair to say we are full on election mode and ready to go. So the Local Government Boundary Commission for England has reviewed the county boundaries, which will be in force for this election. So essentially what that means is now we've got 8 divisions and it's going to be a single member ward for each of those 8 divisions. So Ben's going to cover a little bit of this detail in a moment. But just for information, Dave Hayward has been appointed by the County Council as the returning officer and Lorraine Fowkes will be the deputy returning officer as well. So the key dates are included in 4.1 of the report, but the timetable officially kicks off when we publish the notice of election on Tuesday, the 25th of March. And we'll be publishing that in the usual places, social media, council website, and in the notice boards as well. Just for information, obviously we've got the communications plan in place and promoting it in the usual places with parish councils, on the website, in the notice boards, etc. And poll cards will be going out on or around Friday, the 21st of March. And all of that information for electors will be available if they want to apply for a postal vote, change any of their proxy voting arrangements, etc., or promote the register to vote date as well with family and friends. Just so you know, we will be holding the verification and count here at the council offices. It worked really well for the last 2 elections for the PCC and the general election. So again, we're sticking with that same format, and having everything on site is a huge help to us as a team because we don't need to decamp elsewhere. So just let members know. And I'll now hand over to Ben to discuss the changes at 4.4. And of course, we're happy to take any questions after.
Thank you, Becky. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. So the Local Government Boundary Commission for England has recently carried out a formal electoral review of Staffordshire County Council to ensure that the electorate is accurately represented by each councillor, as detailed in 4.4 onward in your report. So South Staffordshire was previously split into 7 divisions with 8 seats. However, it is now made up of 8 divisions with 8 seats. So the previous division of Cheslin Hay, Essington and Great Worley has essentially been split down the middle into 2 new divisions. So these are called Cheslin Hay Village, Featherstone and Shares Hill, and Great Worley and Essington. So 4.5 in your report contains a link to the official order with more detail. which will take effect from the 1st of May. And there is a map highlighting the changes which can be found in Appendix 2 and Appendix 3 of your report. So the electoral services team have worked to change the divisional boundaries on our electoral management software, as well as our mapping systems, and these have now been undertaken. So the polling district EEA has been highlighted in the table in your report as those electors from Essington, which is around 402 electors from Essington Westcroft, will now vote in the Cheslin-Hay Village, Featherstone and Shares Hill division, essentially just to balance the electorate. And as detailed in 4.7, Womben Community Centre, which was the polling district WAA and a double polling station, will be unavailable for this election as it is undergoing a refurbishment. It's proposed to use Womben Village Hall as a temporary replacement station. It is accessible for voters and is near the community centre. The County Council member has been consulted about the change and no concerns were raised. We will ensure that there is a sign at the community centre on polling day to direct electors and a clear message on polling cards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I did take the point about signage. As Councillor Davis will know, we do often get a lot of confusion in Womborne Village between the village hall, the community centre and also the civic centre. So I think it is essential that we get some clear signage there for voters. Thank you. Right, any questions at the moment? Councillor Allen.
Thank you. Have there been any complaints from the new splitting of the wards into 8 rather than 7? And if so, what are the nature of those complaints?
Anyone like
And secondly, I note that the date of the election has not been moved yet, although I'm not holding my breath with the government in the state it's in. And if there is a possible delay, what kind of expense are we expecting?
Anyone like to answer?
I'll take the second part. At the moment, the position of Staffordshire County Council is that the elections will go ahead on the 1st of May. The areas where the elections are being delayed are what are known as the priority areas for local government reorganisation. So they're ones that had already put in kind of expressions of interest in changing their form of government. In those areas, our understanding is the majority have asked the government to delay those elections for a year. Staffordshire is not one of those areas, so we've been told quite clearly that the elections will proceed on the 1st of May.
So just to clarify, then we're a principal authority still.
We're not a principal authority because they're a concept under the new, whatever that new regime will look like. So at the moment, we just continue as a 2-tier area with the county and the district, and then the new authority, whatever that looks like, and whenever that is formed, will be principal authority.
Thank you, folks.
I think Beck will take the.
Yeah, as yet, no, we haven't had any complaints. These boundaries are going to come into force for the 1st of May election, but the following Standards and Resource Committee, after that, I'll bring a report back and let members know if we do receive any complaints about the new changes.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Allen. Councillor Allen.
Thank you. Just to say, I think it makes a bit more of a difficulty for the county councillors, having it split into 2 wards like that. The county council need to report to two wards rather than 1.
Any further questions or comments? Oh, yeah, we're asked as a committee to know the changes and agree the proposed temporary polling station in Womborne. Are we as a committee happy to agree the polling station in Womborne? Aye, thank you very much. We will move on then to the next item, which is member allowances, parishes and chairman, vice chairman. Again, I think that's Becky Harris.
Thank you, Chair. So independent remuneration panels were actually set up as part of the local authorities regulations in 2003 to provide independent advice on councillor expenses. So just so members are aware, all of the members on the panel are independent and also act in a voluntary capacity. So the panel last met ahead of the 2023 elections to look at member allowance, and we reconvened the panel back in October to have a look at parish councillor allowances with the view to make recommendations back to parish councils, but then also to make recommendations to council on the chairman and vice chairman allowances. So firstly, I'll cover the chairman and vice chairman allowance, and then I'll move on to the parish council allowances after. So currently, the chairman's allowance is £5,653, and the vice chairman receives an allowance of £2,826. So the panel were really interested in looking at other councils, how they're made up, what their structure, how their chairman and vice chairman schemes operate. So we looked at ASIT for family group. So that's councils in this group are a similar size, makeup to us as a district council. So the results of that information is at Appendix A. But just for information, the average allowance a chairman receives is £5,658, which is very similar to ours and is in line with what we pay. And the average allowance a vice chairman receives is £1,861. But just to note that not all vice chairmen actually do receive an allowance. So we must take that into account when we have a look at that figure. So the panel considered how the scheme currently operates, the frequency of meetings attended by both the chairman and the vice chairman, and that's included at 3.9 of the report. The panel discussed various situations and scenarios that highlighted the inflexibility of the current scheme. So, for example, the chairman might attend more events than they've got budget for, and equally the vice chairman might not need to attend any events at all. Or, for instance, the chairman could become incapacitated and the vice chairman would then need to pick up those meetings and responsibilities. So the panel did feel that it was quite inflexible scheme at the moment, how it's operated. So the recommendation from the panel is that the chairman receives 50% of the allowance at the start of their year in office, which is May. The other 50% is held in a budget to be drawn from after 6 months when required. And that the vice chairman's allowance is kept in a budget together with the chairman's 50% and drawn from as and when needed. Anything left in the budget at the end of the year will be released back to council savings. So the second part of the report looks at parish council member allowances. So just so members are aware, there's only currently 2 out of the 27 parish councils in South Staffordshire that pay member allowances, which are Purton and Penkridge. So the panel did send out a survey to all parish councils in South Staffordshire to find out their views, and that's included in the report as well. But just in summary, we had 8 responses back and 6 parish councils indicated that they don't pay any allowances at all. So the panel discussed whether to recommend to parish councils that no member allowances should be paid, if they should continue with the current scheme, or if they should revise the scheme with a lower allowance. So on consideration, the panel's recommendation is that parish councils are not making any changes to the member allowance scheme, but the recommendation is that schemes are formally reviewed on an annual basis, and they're also advertised as well. So I'll hand back to you, Chair, now for any questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Harris. Before we go into questions, could I ask Councillor Davis and Councillor Mrs. Allen to leave the chamber because of a conflict of interest? Thank you. Do we have any questions at all from members? Councillor Dr. Taylor?
My understanding, or our understanding, was the Brood, we paid £20 a year for paper and postage or telephone allowance, and we stopped that because we discovered, I think, that you had to be an elected member to gain any allowance at all. And if you were a co-opted member, both presumably this would apply to the district council as well, that you weren't then entitled to any allowance which was given because you weren't actually elected, you were co-opted. Is that correct, you know?
It's not something I'm aware of, but probably Mrs. Fowkes could enlighten us.
I'm not aware that there's a distinction between co-opted and elected members, because obviously with parishes it's quite usual for members to be co-opted on. I think the confusion may be that if you're a co-opted member on a district council, then you generally don't have voting rights, and therefore there's a distinction between being a co-optee in that capacity and being a co-opted member as opposed to being an elected member. But ultimately that would be a matter for each parish council to take legal advice on it and determine whether they felt that was appropriate or not.
Thank you, Mrs. Fax.
Interesting statistic that 79, they now did a much broader one and found that 79% of all parish councils didn't pay allowances. So we tend to give our time to the community rather than for being. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Lorraine, did I just hear that you said that they can be co-opted onto district as well as being voted, or did I get that wrong? Thank you.
No, so you can be co-opted onto things like, for example, at district level, an overview and scrutiny committee or things like that. But that's what I'm saying, it's this distinction, although you're both known as co-optees, it's a different role and it's a different connotation of co-option.
Yes, I think we've had this position before, haven't we, where there's been a possibility of co-opting people to a district council committee, as often we may do at parish council level, where we co-opt non-elected councillors or other councillors onto various committees for advice and for their specialist knowledge. Any other questions, comments? No. It has been a bit of a topic, I think, for many years, ever since I've been a parish councillor, which is now a long time, 20 years or so. It has been a topic of discussion. I know at other parish councils about whether parish councillors should be paid allowances, but it is very much to the decision of the local parish council. But I believe if a council does decide they wish to pay allowances, it has to go to the remuneration committee for their approval beforehand.
So, Chairman, the remuneration panel of this district council is also the parish remuneration panel, and they are the ones that have considered this and made that recommendation. It would have to go to the parish council for them to determine whether they were or were not going to implement that recommendation or not. And following a member's decision today, that's what will happen. Your recommendation will go forward to the parish councils, and then it will be for each parish council to determine whether they wish to implement a scheme or not.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? No. Now we're required to recommend that this report goes to full council for their.
I think probably, Chairman, if we take, I think we've discussed the parish allowance, if members are content with the proposed recommendation on the parish allowance, and then I think, Becky, you need to come back on the, I know you've covered the chair, and there's, sorry, there's the two elements. There's a parish council allowance, and there's also the chairman and vice chairman provision as well. Right.
So the parish council, we are required to approve the findings of this report as a committee. Yeah. Can we approve that? Or yep. I thank you. And now Mrs. Harris will explain about the chairman and vice chairman's allowance, just to make a decision on that for full council. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the chairman and vice chairman allowances, all the information is included in the report, but the recommendation from the panel was that the chairman would receive 50% of the allowance upfront in May, and then the 50% would be held in a budget, and the vice chairman's allowance would also be held in the budget with the 50% from the chairman. So in effect, the vice chairman won't receive an allowance going forward, but the money will be held in a budget should and when they would like to draw down from it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Mrs. Harris. Are there any questions or comments for Mrs. Harris? No.
didn't see, are these the same as the have they gone up with inflation? I'm sorry, I couldn't quite see in the form.
All member allowances are linked to chief officer pay. So if the chief officer gets a pay increase, then that is linked to members' allowances. So there is an annual increase. Basically, it's normally around the 2% mark.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? No? So can we approve this report to go to full council? Thank you. Anyone against? No. We'll call Councillor Davis and Councillor Allen back into the meeting. Right, thank you. We'll move on to item 6. And Mrs. Bridgewater's reports are always keenly looked forward to by this committee. Workforce update, employment trends and employee survey. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, members. The plan is to provide a slide deck to bring out some of the key points in the employment trends report. So if you can just bear with me for a minute or two whilst I get the technology in place. Just to refer to your papers, the relevant section are pages 81 to 113. Thank you. So we've got the technology working. So I will start with a summary of the report that relates to workforce trends and data. And then with the permission of the chairman, I'll just then pause briefly if you've got any questions on that, members. And then I'll carry on with the presentation, which touches on the results of our recent employee engagement survey, which is also referred to in the same set of papers. Sorry, slight hitch with the technology there. Okay, so the first section I'm focusing on is data in relation to recruitment, retention and succession planning. It's a fairly key area for the local government sector. The Local Government Association, the LGA, regularly report on this. And certainly over the last few years, there have been challenges in this area. Certainly last year's report from the LGA indicated 94% of councils were struggling with recruitment and retention. So it's an area we need to look at closely. I should say, unless otherwise advised, the majority of the data I'm presenting is accurate at year end March 24. The retention rate at that time was 90%. Certainly this quarter it's actually a little better than that. But importantly, in the majority of cases, we're successful in filling our hard to recruit vacancies, which is obviously important to us. We had 86% candidate acceptance rates. Little bit of a health warning with that because that's part year data, because we introduced a new system partway through the year. And also members will be aware of the work that we do with schools. That's an important part of our succession planning. This goes beyond March. These were our summer placements. We had 22 work experience placements and later 2 paid student work experience placements. 7 apprentices, that's currently 8 apprentices. Those are colleagues who are studying an apprentice approved levy qualification with more in the pipeline. And the members may also be aware we have got an annual talent management programme called Aspire. That's an important part of our succession planning and our retention plans. We've got 8 individuals on the programme, which is just concluding. They attend a number of workshops and also present a corporate project. This last year, the group have been working on a staff recognition project and also a staff volunteering project. And broadly speaking, about a third of delegates will go on to some form of career advancement through that route. Okay, so I'll just move on to the next slide. We're looking at some of our equality and inclusion data now. Just looking at our gender pay gap, which we have to report on every year, and confirm that our gender pay gap came in at 0 for the median formula and 2.62% for the mean formula. We have to report on both formulas, as you know. And the next slide illustrates gender composition at our management tiers, and hopefully you'll see from that slide, I won't read all of that data out, but we've got a good gender balance across all of our management tiers. And then some further equality data here, touching on ethnicity. We had 23 colleagues working for us who confirmed they belonged to an ethnic minority group, a very slight improvement on the previous year. But importantly, when we look at the census data, this also indicated we were representative of our local communities, which obviously is very important. Age profile, the employment of younger colleagues is an area that we continually try to strengthen. At the time of the report, we'd got 21% of colleagues who were aged 25 and under. And what I would say on average year on year, we're getting a 2% improvement. And obviously our apprentice scheme helps with that. We do report on other categories. Some are mentioned on the slide deck. There's others in the report. In some cases, the data samples are too small to draw meaningful conclusions. So our focus on those categories is about encouraging disclosure rates. Okay, so that's a quick summary of some of the highlights from the workforce trends. And with the approval of the chairman, I will just pause there in case there's any questions before I move on to the employee survey.
Thank you, Mrs. Bridgewater. Are there any questions from anyone? Councillor Dr. Taylor?
The apprentice scheme which you've got, so what proportion of the apprentices go on to full-time employment in the council? And what happens if an apprentice fails their exams, or you say they have qualifications, they have an exam at the end of it, or you just explain that for a second? Sorry, if everybody else knows, I'm sorry to ask the question.
Thank you very much for the question. It will vary year on year because the duration of an apprentice's employment and qualification will depend on the job that they're in and the professional area. But I would say on average, at least 50%, some years it's more, will gain permanent employment after. What we try to do is, even if the person is placed in one service, we try to give them as much experience as possible across the council to obviously increase their chances of gaining employment and exposure to experience. And sorry, Councillor Taylor, can you just remind me the second part of your question?
They go on to some sort of professional, semi-professional qualification at the end of their apprentice scheme as an automatic thing, and if they fail, what happens? Always what happens.
Thank you again for the clarification, Councillor Taylor. So we obviously try and support them in getting through their accreditation, and sometimes that's an exam, sometimes that's evidence of pieces of work that they've completed in the workplace. So I'm not aware to date that we've had anybody that hasn't concluded those qualifications successfully. We work very closely, and our line managers work very closely, work with whether it's the college or the training provider. So there are regular reviews throughout the year so that we can really keep an eye on progress. And if there's any areas that the apprentice needs a little bit of extra help with, we try and keep on the front foot on that to obviously make sure that they pass their exams. And as I say, to the best of my knowledge, we haven't had anybody that's failed their exams.
Thank you. It's just a question about retention, really, because I'm concerned about this following the devolution paper. Clearly, those people who feel their work is under threat will be looking elsewhere. And while we would be very much regretful of losing anybody, nevertheless, there will be some drift, I think, towards county council employment or whichever the next strategic authority is going to be. Are there any early indications about reductions in workforce coming from the devolution information? And if so, what posts are they particularly looking at?
Thank you for the question. I think clearly we need, there is further detail to unfold on devolution, depending on what models are playing where. And we are talking about some time in the future. So I think the key issue that we're facing with at the moment is that we haven't got all of the answers to all of the questions. So naturally, there will be a level of uncertainty. We've not been given any information to suggest that there are specific reductions that would be in a position to confirm to staff. So very much our approach at the moment is to get that further information in, so that when we are clear with the facts, that's really important. We can be really clear with the workforce about what the implications are, if any. Certainly we know that there'll be change. And we'll need to explain what that change looks like, but when we've got that information in. So very much at the moment, you know, it's very much business as usual, real focus on delivering our services, but regular communication with staff. And that's important, even if it's a case that we don't have any information at this stage. So that's our approach at the moment.
Thank you. I think that's what I wanted to know, and some reassurance that I think the council as well is very concerned about the staff, and to express that to them, please, on our behalf, and to say to them that we'll do everything that we can to assist.
Thank you. That's greatly appreciated.
Are there any other questions? Can I ask, Mrs. Bridgewater, in terms of our apprenticeships and trainees, are they in any particular professional areas, or are they spread across the board? Yeah, what's that look like?
Thank you for the question. We have a mix. So we've had colleagues, we had one colleague recently who worked in HR, finance and street scene. They left for a promotion. We have a lot of colleagues who come in through administrative routes, customer services from time to time, but we've certainly got 2 colleagues at the moment in digital services, and we've also got colleagues who are working in the revenue and benefits services.
Thank you. Dr. Taylor referred to qualifications. Are our qualifications based on academic type qualifications, or are they competence-based qualifications, or a broad mix of the two?
Thank you. At the moment, the majority are based on competency-based qualifications. What I would say is in the revenue and benefits related services, is that's quite a good career path in terms of succession planning. So once they pass their qualification there at the appropriate time, and other managers then consider them for higher level qualifications in those services.
Thank you. Any other? Oh, yes, sir. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Do all the apprenticeships take up the same time as each other? How long do they actually last over? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really good question. The apprentice qualifications, the duration will vary. It depends on the professional area that they're working in and studying in. And sometimes that will depend on the how the qualification is run by that particular training provider. What is a really good quick indicator is on Google. There's a national apprenticeship website, and you can sift all of the qualifications that are available, and at that point that will give you the duration. So a minimum normally is 12 months, but obviously if it's a professional qualification or a technical one, it could last for 3 years.
That's really interesting. Can I ask, are some of these apprentices actually at university at the same time? Are they, is it their working year, gap year, or how does that work? Thank you.
Thank you. At the moment, we don't, I believe, have any apprentices studying through university. They're studying through a college or a training provider route. If, though, for example, we decided to do maybe a higher level apprenticeship in one of the professional areas, then the way that would work is they may well be supported by a university education route. And I believe it's got to be 20% of the job has got to be related to training. So normally that would be day release where that applies. 1 day a week, just for clarification.
Are there any other? Oh, Councillor Allen.
I'm just wondering, having spoken to the tree inspector about his difficulty in finding apprentices, whether we actually go out and say there are vacancies for apprentices in this particular area. I acknowledge with him it's difficult to find young people who want to work outdoors all the time. But he was showing me his iPad with all the relevant trees on it and the way in which he has to actually make that up. And he said that the last apprentice he had was very, very good with the computer. And it would actually make his work faster if someone walked around with him holding the tablet and entering the information for him. And it's an interesting concept because, we are interested in our trees, for instance, and they are an asset to this authority. It made me wonder at the time whether we ought to list areas where apprenticeships are welcome rather than just waiting to see what comes in.
Thank you. I think that's a really, really good question. We advertise on the National Apprenticeship website and also on our council website, but we also try and supplement that advertising depending on what the job is in the area. So that could even be on notice boards at the local leisure centres, local areas within the community, and where appropriate, we notify schools, perhaps the sixth form audience. So we do try and tailor that as much as we can, we agree, and just so that we can get that out there. What we find is different job groups and professions will have also locally different types of networks. So we try and draw on that experience there. But it's interesting you're mentioning about our tree work, because I do believe that's an area that we are looking to recruit to shortly for an apprentice.
Thank you, Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chairman. A quick question, Wendy. I would hope that apprentices that are based here with SSDC, if due to reorganisational, system in the future and what have you, it would hopefully stand them in very good stead in the outside world. Would I be right in thinking that?
Yes, I mean, I'd certainly like to think so. We certainly make efforts with our work experience placements and our apprenticeships to give them a broad range of experience. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, even if they are perhaps located in one service, we do try and give them lots of contact with other services. And I highlighted one example where we had an apprentice working across 3 services, just to expose them to as much experience as possible.
Thank you, Chair. On that, Wendy, can I ask, do you have cross-council apprenticeships where people spend time in one council with us? How does that work, if it works at all? Thank you.
Thank you. We haven't had an arrangement yet where we've shared an apprentice across our council and another council. It's not to say we couldn't do that. The situation hasn't arisen yet. What we do look at, obviously, is levy spend, and actually that's something that we're having a look at the moment. So if ever we have any levy that isn't committed, we're looking at, well, what options could there be for sharing that? That could be with a local council or local organisation. We don't have a policy on that at the moment. So it may be, as well as that piece of work, we could pick that up and have a look at what opportunities that may bring.
Okay, are there any other questions at all? Can I just make a comment, Mrs. Bridgewater? I don't want this to sound cynical or flippant in any way, but we in Wombourne have particular problems in certain areas with vandalism, where trees are being felled by local people, and I'm sure it must happen in other villages as well. Particularly with the technology has made things like chainsaws and goodness knows what very portable, very light, very accessible. I wondered if some of those youths, I'm assuming it's youths that are doing it, could well be taken on board as apprentices, and they could get some pay and some qualifications for the work, the things that they're doing.
I mean, certainly we'd be very welcoming of, we're a local major employer. We think it's really important that we provide local work experience and employment employment opportunities. And I guess there's an element as a part of a corporate parenting role when we do get young colleagues coming in around supporting with them, you know, with that broader skill set.
Any other questions or comments? No? I think we just, to note this report. Oh, Mr. Boyd.
Thank you. There is a second part of the presentation which covers the employee survey findings. I am conscious of the committee's time here, so I will try and make sure that I present that succinctly. Thank you. Okay, this was referred to in the report. Every year we conduct an annual employee engagement survey, and this year we did it a little bit differently. It was the same questionnaire, but it was a digital questionnaire for community hub workers. And it was a hard copy questionnaire for some of our front colleagues in community services such as leisure centres, street scene and Baggeridge, really to encourage uptake of the questionnaire, if I'm honest. I think just to explain, some of those colleagues, due to the nature of the job role, they don't have access to the intranet and a works email address. So that's why we tried a different approach. And I'll just quickly give you the return rates. So the digital questionnaire that went out got a return rate of 67%, which we were really pleased with. And the hard copy questionnaire got a return rate of 41%. We'll be looking to improve this in the future, but we were really pleased with this because the previous year, this is a fourfold improvement on the previous year. So this method of engagement seems to work better for those colleagues. Primarily, these results relate to the digital questionnaire responses, but where it's relevant, I'll refer if perhaps the survey responses were a little bit different for this survey, just to draw that to members' attention. And we asked a range of questions, including whether colleagues thought we were a well-run council, questions about well-being, leadership and culture and working environment. And what I would say is we used an average rating scale between 0 and 10, unless advised otherwise. The closer the rating is to 10 is a very positive result. The closer it is to 0, that's a negative result. And the orange key will highlight on each slide, I beg your pardon, if it's not a new question, how we compared with the previous survey. So just dealing with whether colleagues thought we were a well-run council. We asked colleagues whether they thought we provided regular and relevant communication about the council's priorities, and we received an average rating of 8.6, which was a modest improvement on the previous year. We asked colleagues if they felt they received sufficient training to carry out their job, and we received an average rating of 8.2. I think a very minor dip from the previous year. And we also asked colleagues if they had a good sense of purpose and fulfilment in their job, getting at things like job enrichment, and received a rating of 8.2. And this was a new question. So, you know, all in all, positive rating. I would say where it perhaps differed slightly with the hard copy questionnaire, scored slightly less on the regular communication, but doing a deep dive into those results, that was actually tied up with the fact that a lot of those job roles didn't need access to a works email or an intranet. And of course, we're now in such a digital age with digital communication. That's kind of an area that we thought we need to look at. So that's one of the areas we're taking forward, which I'll pick up at the end. The next set of questions related to well-being, and we received an average rating of 8.4 about whether colleagues thought the council cared about the well-being, which was an improvement. Positive rating about whether colleagues felt safe in their working environment, that was a 9, again an improvement. Then we asked a couple of questions here. We asked colleagues whether they felt stressed, low or anxious on a regular basis. We received an average rating of 4.4, which was the same as the previous year. Clearly with this question, that's one of those questions we want it as close to 0 as possible. Excuse me. And we also asked colleagues if they felt they could recognise and manage the things that cause them stress. And that question is getting at how resilient is our workforce, and can they bounce back from setbacks easily and things like that. And we received an average rating of 7.4. Just kind of unpacking that a little bit. What I would say is The wellbeing question came out a little bit lower in the hard copy questionnaire. For the same reason as the communication, we sometimes promote some of our services through digital communication. So again, that's giving us some messages about adapting that communication and finding some workarounds for those areas. I think picking up on the last two questions, the ratings haven't really changed since last year, but what we did find is one or two comments in the comments box from staff indicating that some colleagues are struggling with health conditions. So that's something we're going to pick up in our wellbeing work. So just moving on to the next thing, which is leadership questions. We asked colleagues if they thought their contribution was valued and received a rating of 8.2. Whether their performance is evaluated fairly. We received an 8.3, which was an improvement on the previous year. We asked colleagues if they had a good relationship with their line manager, and we had a rating of 9.2, which was the rating last year was strong, but we had a significant improvement. Really pleased about that question. And we asked colleagues if they were satisfied with the leadership of the council. Stayed the same, a healthy rating of 8.7, but obviously that's something we're always looking to stay strong on. Then we asked questions about environment and culture. So we asked colleagues if they thought their environment was positive and supportive, and received an average rating of 8.6. We asked colleagues if they felt the council's flexible and supports them in balancing their personal and work commitments, and received a rating of 8.2. That stayed the same. We asked colleagues if they felt they received help from their colleagues when they need it, and received an 8.9, which I think was a slight improvement. And we also asked colleagues if they felt the council's an inclusive organisation. A very minor dip from the previous year in a very similar place, and had a rating of 8.7. And the next question is our employer of choice question. We asked colleagues if they'd recommend the council as a place to work, and we had just under 97.5% of respondents said yes, which we were clearly delighted with. So I'm not going to read out this slide. We've got lots of comments. This is just a sample. I'll leave that up for a second or two. But you'll see colleagues are commenting on things like our flexibility and trust, and saying some nice things about working for us. So just a couple of slides now to kind of pull together the key messages. In terms of what's going well, lots of colleagues commented on flexibility, being able to balance personal and work commitments, and appreciating hybrid working where we're able to offer that. Our corporate communications, I think, is one of the most difficult things to get right in any organisation, but that's staying strong and improving. Again, positive comments about working environment and culture. You didn't see it in the slide deck because this is an executive summary, but we have some high ratings for those that are aware of our wellbeing services. They're rated as good or excellent. And in terms of council facilities, we're still getting really positive comments around the community hub. What a great collaboration space it is for working with colleagues and members and partners. And last but not least, really important, very strong in terms of working relationships with managers and colleagues. In terms of areas we can strengthen, which I believe I've touched on, I think in terms of the Community Hub electronic survey, not that the ratings necessarily have changed, but we do recognise one or two colleagues are saying they're struggling with health conditions. You'll see from the bottom of the slide, the timing of this works well for us because we're in the middle of reviewing our health and wellbeing strategy, and we are adopting a really high employee involvement approach in that, so we can work through that, recognising we can never eradicate stress, but really just exploring what we can do to support in terms of adjustments at work and help where we can. And as I've already mentioned, I think the key message from the hard copy questionnaire for some of our frontline community services colleagues is just recognising in the world of digital communication, we do need to find some workarounds and make sure that our communication is as good as possible so that our information is accessible to those colleagues. So that's a summary of the survey. As always, I'd be happy to take any questions, Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Bridgewater. Are there any questions? Yes, Bernard.
Thank you, Chair. Do we have any staff that are actually on long-term sick at the moment? If you could comment on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we do have colleagues on long-term sick. Within the report, it does give details of our absence, and you've quite rightly picked up on that theme. Our short-term absence is very, very low, but we do have one or two on long-term sick. That will generally be tied up with chronic conditions, and obviously some of that time can be involved with complex conditions, waiting for a diagnosis as well as treatment time. As you know, we obviously we need to take a balanced approach with this. We've got services to deliver, but our employee wellbeing is very important, and we've got a lot of positive policies around that about supporting staff through those conditions and recovery time, etc.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you. The statistics regularly have been quite low for disability, as we know. And do you think some of the staff are reluctant to say they have a disability or a long-term illness of some kind? And that's part of the difficulty in these statistics. We're not quite sure who has got long-term conditions, and they're reluctant to declare it.
I think that's a really good question, and appreciate the question. I think people will declare, obviously, long-term conditions if the sickness absence, and we work with colleagues through that and support them. I think in relation to the low disclosure rate for disability, it is very interesting, and I think reasons will vary in terms of informal discussions that I've had with colleagues. Some people perhaps wouldn't want to have a label. Some colleagues don't view it as a disability. What we've certainly tried as a new approach is sometimes using an overly technical definition to describe disability necessarily isn't always the best approach. And I think it's important we also explain why we collect this information and what we do with it, because clearly that's to inform workforce support and workforce plans. What is important, of course, is we don't just chase data as well, but actually if somebody has declared they've got a disability, are we supporting them sufficiently? So this has been discussed at our equality steering group, and we're taking a number of actions on the back of that. One of them is we're doing a piece of work of colleagues that have got hearing and visual disabilities, just to make sure, with the world of virtual working, we're doing everything we can to support those colleagues. We're involving colleagues in that. My team also are personally contacting colleagues who've already declared they've got a disability, because if they've worked for the council for a long time, it could have been years on their recruitment form since they declared. Other illnesses could have emerged and disabilities. So we're just refreshing that, so colleagues do know we do act on it, and just to check, are the adjustments in place working? And we're trying to move away, as I indicated earlier, about maybe overly technical descriptions, and perhaps say things like around, do you have a condition that could affect day-to-day life in or out of work, that you need medication or support for? And then we explain what we do with that data. So I don't know whether that will be effective, but we're just trying one or two new approaches to try and encourage that disclosure. And hopefully I'll be able to report on that at the next committee in terms of how effective that's been.
My comment would be, I think if you looked at your councillors, you'll probably get a much better idea about disability. I think a lot of us have got some problem or other. Technically speaking, we're not employees of the council, but there are certain persons, I'm looking at my chair here, who do require some extra assistance. Do your department keep a list of those people who might require assistance? I'm asking this question because previously we had a member of council who had to have assistance in reading his papers and in replying to, after his stroke, who had difficulty in making replies when he wanted to. And I asked for a one-to-one for him at the time, and it was thought inappropriate. And I did feel myself that with an illness where someone is looking at recovery program, we should have perhaps been doing more to help.
Thank you very much for the question. My understanding is I think sometimes we do collect that data, and Mrs. Fowkes might be able to provide me with some guidance on that. I think you make some very valid points there. And certainly, you know, if members did want any additional assistance, they would be very welcome to come to us. But that might be something that's worth taking forward to the member engagement group. We do surveys from time to time. I know we've previously done one on wellbeing, but given within our equalities group, we are actually looking at specific needs as well. I really don't see why we couldn't open that work up and involve members. So if that's okay with the chairman's support, Mrs. Fowkes and myself will take that away and we'll have a look at that and have a discussion with the member engagement group around that. I think there's some really valid suggestions coming forward on that theme, and thank you for them.
Yes, I think that is a very good point. Thank you, Councillor Allen, for that. And Councillor Dr Taylor?
The statistics all go on and on and on. Really quite interesting to try and differentiate where the buck stops at the top with you. Are you under more stress because or is it the lower echelons you're already looking at? Do your survey throughout the senior management as well as the apprentices?
Thank you, that's an excellent question. Yes, the survey goes out to every single member of staff. We are very careful about, we group the themes so that we can obviously review the results and look at any red flags, but we're very careful about how we group people who complete the questionnaire, so they're not in too small a group, so they can't be identified because the survey is anonymous. But obviously, if we do pick up any trends, we have a look at that, and we'll feed that into our wellbeing group. Obviously, work closely with Mrs. Rhodes, who leads on health and safety as well, and we've worked together on things like stress risk assessments and wellbeing. So when we pick up themes, we will try and tackle it in that way. But I can't say that it's at an isolated area of the council. And of course, when we measure this, it's the day somebody completes the questionnaire and how life is for them at that time, and things can change.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Is that the end of your reporting, Mrs. Bridgewater? As I said at the beginning, I think Mrs. Bridgewater's reports always provoke a lot of thought and a lot of questions from this committee, and I think that's shows the level of interest of this committee for one, and the quality of the reports for another. So thank you very much for that. And on a personal basis, I was reminded strangely when you were giving results of surveys, etc. On a private basis, and when I was working, I actually did some work for this council over 30 years ago, about 1991, 92 time. And at that time, the leaders and managers of the council felt that they did a good job. And I must confess, compared with outside businesses, etc., they did. But I doubt very much if the results of the surveys of staff at that time would have given such positive results as we're getting at the moment. So thank you very much for that. Thank you. And I'll take it as it's just to note the comments of these reports for council. So thank you. I think move on to the next item, which is the have we covered the inclusive workplace policy with your? That's your next bit. Okay, thank you. On to the inclusive workplace policy.
Thank you, Chairman, and apologies you're getting a double dose from me this afternoon. So the papers before you focus on some new employment legislation called the Worker Protection Act. And as you may know, this took effect on the 26th of October 2024. For ease of reference, the report is detailed from pages 115 onwards in your papers. If I could kindly refer members to paragraph 3.1 of the report, this paragraph explains that this new legislation has been brought in to strengthen obligations on employers to prevent sexual harassment at work. It's described as a preventative duty, and the language is all about requiring employers to take proactive measures to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. It's also worth pointing out that the breadth of wording in the Act also means that employers are required to take steps to prevent sexual harassment by third parties too. So in terms of context, the council already has a range of policies and training and measures to promote good organisational values and standards and behaviour as part of our organisational culture work. But the report sets out between paragraph 3.2 and paragraph 3.7 that both the legislation and some of the supporting guidance that's been written by the Equality and Human Rights Commission set out some specific actions that they'd expect to see from employers to demonstrate compliance with this new law. So this does include strengthening our existing policy, which we've done, in that our existing policy now makes specific reference to this new act. But it also talks about things like risk assessments and also an action plan. So to inform this work, I've consulted with key colleagues who've got an expertise and an interest in this subject. So that's included managers from customer service. That's included my colleague, Mrs. Rhodes, and her colleagues from the health and safety team, Unison, our equality group. And on the back of that consultation, we've developed this new policy. We've also pulled together a corporate risk assessment, which does pull in a lot of our existing policies, such as things like lone working. And we've also looked at the action plan as well that's recommended. That's actually set out in the report in paragraph 3.7. And hopefully you'll agree that that includes some pretty straightforward recommendations and actions. Things like making sure that we communicate this new policy widely across the workforce so they're aware of it. And in Appendix B, there's an executive summary, a nice easy read, so we can publicise that widely. Also, as you'd expect, we will be making sure that we provide training to all of our managers on this new policy, and that will take place over the next 12 months. I suppose just to summarise what I would say with my HR background and hat on is that a lot of the measures that members and senior leaders support and already take at the council around things like positive leadership and engagement and culture plans, they are really effective strategies in minimising any form of harassment in the workplace, not just sexual harassment. But the additional actions that we've set out in the report, they're important as part of good governance in terms of demonstrating that we take this new legislation seriously and that we've put these measures in place to make sure that we can demonstrate compliance. So the recommendations are asking for this committee to support the approval and adoption of this new policy. But as always, with the permission of the chairman, I'd be more than happy to take any questions.
Mrs. Bruce, was there any questions or comments from people on the floor? So I did take the point actually when I was reading through this and comments you made. There are some things in here that equally apply to elected members as to employees, particularly things like lone working and safety, etc., which is something that we often overlook. I think whether you be a new member or whether you be a long-standing member, I think there are some things that we do take for granted, but it is a dangerous world out there sometimes, and we do overlook that. So thank you very much. And committee, can we note those comments and recommend them for adoption by the council? Yep. Thank you very much. Now, Mrs. Bridgewater, I think we can let you off. You can stay if you wish. As ever, we do welcome your company, but I think we can move on to item 8, the corporate health and safety policy with Mrs. Rhodes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. It's been very nice actually to follow Wendy because I think there's some common themes across the report, so it's quite good timing. Thank you. This is the annual update that I bring to the committee about the work that we've done through the previous year in relation to our corporate or internal health and safety responsibilities and our plans for the following year. As in previous years, we continue with a very similar scheme of meetings. We have a steering group meeting which meets around every 6 weeks and has good attendance from service areas that are the higher risk areas in terms of health and safety across the authority. And that then feeds into a more strategic group which looks at the overview of health and safety across the organisation. We continue each year as required, and this is with the input of the steering group, to review all of the corporate risk assessments. We have a suite of risk assessments which are applicable corporately, and then risk assessments within specific service areas. So over the last year, we've reviewed the corporate health and safety policy, which you'll recall came to this committee, and that has now been implemented. We have a team of trained first aiders who are available at all times that the offices are open to the public. And we have a rota for them to make sure that we have sufficient cover as we're required to do. And we also have coverage across the leisure centres, baggarage and street scene, as well as for health and safety. We have a team of fire marshals who look after us as well, again on a rota basis. And we have a small team of staff who are trained in lift evacuation. So if the lifts get stuck or there's an issue with the lifts, they are able to safely evacuate people from the lifts. And we also have staff who can assist with getting people out of the building, perhaps less able people out of the building, so they're trained in the use of evacuation chairs to be able to get them downstairs safely if they're less mobile and unable to use a lift in the event of a fire. So one of the big pieces of work that the team have been involved in over the last year is to develop a lockdown policy for the authority, or for the community hub. So not just for our own staff and members, but for other occupants of the building as well. And this is, we would need to use this in case of a major incident in the building that we needed to lock the building down for. And we've built that procedure around the advice that we've been given by Protect UK. We've used their help and support in building up that policy and the procedures that we'll put into place. And as part of that, we have an adaptation to the alarm system, which has a number of break points that we will be able to use to signal to staff and tenants that a lockdown procedure has been invoked at that point in time. And once all that has been agreed and implemented, we'll do some exercises and some drills on that as well, so that everybody is fully aware of what they need to do. I did say that there were some recurring themes in this afternoon's report, and I know that we've talked about tree safety in the surveys from an apprentice point of view, but also just to make the point that really over the last few years that we've done great work in doing full survey of our trees and understanding far more the trees that we have within the district and the condition that those trees are in, and logging if they require work and undertaking work as required. Particularly important with high winds forecast that we are doing, what we can do to make sure that those trees we are aware of, as I say, we've done a full survey now, that we've got the baseline for that tree stock. We do health surveillance. There are some particular roles where staff use equipment which will emit either noise or vibration that can cause some health issues. So we do surveillance to sort of understand where the baseline was, particularly if staff are coming to us new, where they're at that point that they come in, and then monitor to see if there's been any change in that. However, one of the things that we have done is to actually really reduce the risk from that equipment. We have a lot more battery operated equipment now than petrol or fuel operated equipment, which has reduced that risk. I've said that we will continue to monitor risk assessments and review risk assessments. And that also includes looking at policies, updating those and adjustments to those policies. One of those over the last year has been the stress and wellbeing policy, again linking into some of the comments from Mrs Bridgewater earlier on. And at the moment, for the start of the financial year, we're looking at the training programme in relation to health and safety for staff next year. We have had an internal audit this year, and while we haven't received the final report yet, it hasn't been finalised and signed off. The couple of minor recommendations are being implemented. The one has been implemented and the other one is well on the way to being implemented. So there was nothing of significant concern within that. And I'm pleased to say that since the last update, there haven't been any accidents which we're required to report to the HSE, so no reportable accidents. Chair, thank you. That concludes my report, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Thanks. Any questions? Councillor Mrs Allen?
Firstly, I noticed during the last parish summit, we've got no fire evacuation notices by some of our exit doors, nor have I ever had a fire drill in the time that I've been within the council. And I think it's something where we all ought to be aware of where we can help other people as well when we're in this building. When I go to conferences elsewhere, which I do have to do very frequently, there are fire evacuation notices by the fire exit doors which indicate where you should go and how you should make yourself available. There are also designated people who are, and they're designated at the time of the conference, who are required to go and sweep the toilets, look at ancillary rooms and so forth. I'm assuming that when we're here, we're normally accompanied by staff anyway, but we had an incident in our village last week where a doctor's surgery had to be closed down due to an incident inside the surgery itself. And it made me think about this building at that time and how you evacuate people when there's a difficulty. Having certain facilities in this building enhances the risk, really, for those of us who are sitting here, minding our own business, so to speak, and just getting on with what we're doing. And if something did kick off and we did have somebody who was violent within the building, what is the alert situation for the staff, and what would you expect the local councillors to do in that situation?
Thank you. Yeah, really good question. And when I've referred to the lockdown policy, that is how we refer to the whole policy and what we would do in that situation. That is just being finalised, and we've then got a plan to communicate that out to both staff, tenants and members. So all that information will be coming out shortly with the fire alarm and what it will sound like. And as I say, we will do exercises in relation to that, as well as, so there's a whole package of information and training due to come out. We do fire evacuations. We've got the fire marshal team, and they sweep the whole of the building, so it would include the chamber area and the meeting rooms in this location, as well as the sort of more central office area. So that is operational at all times that meetings are on, and marshals would know what to do. They're senior marshals and they know where the evacuation points are. I think a good point about the information on evacuation points. We'll check that. We do have fire risk assessments covering the building, but we'll check that and maybe even so communicate that out to members as well as. I think we have done evacuations with members at times where we have perhaps more members here than staff in evenings and things like that. We probably could do another one what we always say is that we're reluctant to do too many because people then think that if the fire alarm does go off and they need to evacuate, we run the danger of people thinking, oh, it's another exercise, and they're not bothered about moving out. So there is a fine balance between doing enough and not doing too many to keep it serious when it does happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I am minded of an incident, when I was a member previously, and it was in the previous council chamber on the previous layout of offices, and we do get rather complacent about things. And there was a fire practice, a fire drill, and there were a number of members in a particular part of this building, and they walked past what was a fire exit, and because it was never regarded as an entrance or an exit previously, or at all as a normal one, they just ignored it and walked the furthest distance to what they recognised as being an exit. And I think there were some comments about that at the time, but we haven't had another drill in my presence here since that particular day. I'm sure that Mrs. Rhodes remembers that incident very well. Thank you. But any other questions or comments? Councillor Mrs. Allen again.
If I may just come back about that. I think the only major threat of violence in my time in this building has been when some objectors to a planning application came in. They were beating on the doors and the walls of this chamber. And I thought at the time about security staff and about what we would do if someone entered the chamber, set about a fracas with someone else. There are a number of us in here whose health will be up to punching somebody in the nose. So the question really is not just about our safety as regards general running of the building, but in exceptional circumstances where we call in help from. I mean, I don't know if there are any panic buttons in this building, but actually there should be one in here because of the number of members of public who are allowed in at certain times. And while I'm not looking for trouble, I'm all for preventing things from escalating. And I think that's the really important thing. Someone said to me, where is your nearest fire extinguisher? Right this moment, I don't know what the answer is. So we do need to be more fully informed, I think, about how we handle certain situations.
Sorry, Chairman, if I could just make it, obviously I was there on the evening that you're referring to, Councillor Allen. On those occasions when we are aware that there is a potential for an incident to occur, then we do employ additional security measures. So whilst it may not have been apparent, we had got plans in place behind that to potentially control that should anything have occurred on that evening and it had the potential to get out of hand. We had already kind of, if you like, risk assess that and put in place additional security measures. And we would always do that if we're aware of that. Where probably before you joined the council, we had another contentious planning application, large demonstration, and again we had additional security measures on the evening for then. So yes, absolutely we do, but perhaps we need to communicate that out more to give that reassurance to members.
Any other questions or comments? No. We're just recommending this for council, or so are we happy as a committee to note the current position and priorities recognised? Yeah. Thank you very much. We're in favour of that. Thank you, Mrs. Rhodes, for your presentation and answering the questions. Thank you. We'll move on to the next item, item 9, Code of Practice on Good Governance for Local Authority Statutory Officers. Is that you, Mrs. Fax?
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. First, a couple of reports from myself. So as the report sets out, the kind of oversight bodies for the 3 statutory roles issued a Code of Practice on Good Governance. So that covers myself as monitoring officer, the chief finance officers and chief executives. And the code seeks to ensure that good governance is in place with regard to administrative, financial and ethical governance. As monitoring officer, I undertook a review of that code when it was issued, and I'm pleased to report to members that there are no major non-compliance issues identified, and able to give assurance to members that South Staffordshire Council is compliant with the main recommended standards within that code. However, the report is brought before members today really to highlight the fact that there is that code and that we are compliant with it, but also suggest that, as probably with every code of practice and every local authority, there are always margins of improvement that we can implement. So I've gone through the code and the 7 standards which is set out at 3.4 of your report on page 158. And as I say, one of the key things and one of the key themes in the code is what's called the golden triangle, and that's the fact that your monitoring officer, section 151 officer, and chief executive should have a seat at the top table. We have that here at South Staffordshire. As members will be no doubt aware from press reports on some other local government failures, that is not always the case. So there's many where there's been kind of the bankruptcy reports in respect of other authorities, and quite often one of the key themes that comes out of those reports, those public interest reports, is the fact that the statutory officers are not involved in those key decisions on a routine basis. As I say, here at South Staffordshire we do. Our corporate leadership team consists of the 3 roles plus others, and that ensures we have that good oversight of decisions and the close working relationship of the 3 officers. So as I mentioned, there's no major non-compliance issues, but however, we do think there are always ways that we can, we're a continually learning council, and part of that is to make sure we're in the absolute best position possible. So what is being suggested is that I undertake a further review of the code and produce an action plan and bring that back to this committee and audit and risk, because it's one of these that sits across both committees, bring it back to yourselves and members of audit and risk. So again, you can have that further assurance as to compliance. So the recommendation members are set out at 7.7 in the report, that you note the code of practice and the council's compliance with the main provisions, and that further you support the proposal for a full review of the code and development of an action plan as necessary.
Thank you, Mrs. Foakes. Any questions at all or any comments to Mrs. Foakes? Mrs. Allen?
Just a brief question really about compliance. The arrangements for parish councils and the code of conduct are all similar for all parish councils, as you know. Are there any, I understand you're undertaking this review, but I'm wondering how much parish councils have undertaken their review, the current legislation, and I'm wondering if you're offering any advice to them while you're updating your own policy.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, absolutely happy to kind of share recommendations with parish councils. As you'll be aware, obviously the parish councils are slightly different because you won't have chief executives, you won't have necessarily 151s, although you will have a responsible finance officer. And obviously I'm the monitoring officer for parishes as well, in respect of code of conduct matters, but obviously the parish clerks really fulfil that kind of governance role, if you like. But more than happy that once we've gone through the code and we've got an action plan, we can put forward some recommendations to parishes that they may wish to consider for implementation at that level.
Thank you. I think that'd be really useful. Parish councils don't always absorb the latest set of stuff that's going through, and some of them, I'm sure, have got stuff that's probably 20 years old. So, any advice that we can give out to them is really helpful. While we're doing our own reviews, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yes, I think I'm aware that there is a wide discrepancy in the competencies and the behaviours of parish councils, which has only been heightened by being a member of this committee and having more involvement in things. Yes, I think it's a very good idea. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? No. So we note the code of practice and the council's compliance. I must admit, as a member of the Audit and Risk Committee, we do get regular reports on compliance and audits, etc. And this council has a particularly high standard very low incidence of any compliance issues, and we have a very high standard of complying with all the various regulations, etc. Members, can we support the proposal for a full review of the code and the development of an action plan, if necessary, takes place? Yep. Thank you very much for that. So, Mrs. Fax, we'll move on now to consultation on standards. Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. So yes, on the 18th of December, so just before Christmas, the government launched a consultation with respect to the code of conduct regime and the standards regime that applies to all local authorities in England. So one of the key things that they're considering is introducing a mandatory minimum code of conduct for local authorities, although a model code was issued a few years ago, and I know the vast majority of authorities have adopted that model code. This would be kind of taking it up one step to require a mandatory minimum code, so there would be a degree of consistency across the country. There would still be potentially an element for authorities to add to that code, but what they wouldn't be able to do is detract from that code. So the consultation to this ends on the 26th of February, so just over a month away. What I've done here, members, is, and members may recall a report that went to full council just before Christmas in respect of the consultation on remote attendance. I've prepared a response for myself as monitoring officer. I think probably the one thing we can all agree on is we're not going to get all members to agree on what the response to a code of conduct consultation should be. So what I'm suggesting via this report is this goes in as my response, but following the meeting today and subject to any comments from members, a link to that consultation will go out to every member, inviting every member to make their own comments in respect of the consultation. So members who have different views from myself on what should or shouldn't happen in respect of the code of conduct will be able to do that, and I'll supply that link to all members to enable you to all give your individual views as well. So just briefly, members, at 3.2, it's just an extract there from what the consultation document says. And it's, as you'll see, the government considers that the current local authority standards and conduct regime is in certain key aspects ineffectual, inconsistently applied and lacking in adequate powers to effectively sanction members found in serious breach of their codes of conduct. So as I say, the proposed response is set out in Appendix 1 to the report, and by bringing this report before members, say, hopefully engage all members in taking part in that consultation process. My response supports the proposed introduction of a mandatory minimum code of conduct. I think that's good for consistency and making sure that all councils, and indeed, as they are monitoring officer for the parishes as well, so having that consistent code would be useful, I think, and also for transparency purposes for members of the public to know that standards, regardless of which authority you're a member of, you're required to comply with those standards. I'd also welcome the introduction of a requirement for a member to cooperate with investigations. At the moment, there isn't an actual requirement to cooperate. That can cause problems. Generally speaking here, it doesn't, thankfully. Most investigations proceed with cooperation, but I think having that as a requirement would be a good step. There are then some proposals, as you'll see from the appendix, around standards committee and the membership and voting of that committee. Again, my view is that I think we have a very effective standards committee here at South Staffordshire. I don't see the need to really amend that to any large degree. We have an independent person, and that independent person is involved in all code of conduct complaint determinations. I think they have that clear role to play as an independent person. I think to remain truly independent, then they shouldn't be involved in chairing the committee. I think that's a job for an elected member as opposed to an independent person who may be advising and giving their view to the committee, but not necessarily chairing it. There is also an element of the consultation around costs, as members may be aware at the moment. If we have a code of conduct complaint and that goes through to a full investigation, the costs of that are borne by this authority, be that be a parish investigation or a district council investigation. They can, depending on the circumstances, be quite significant. So I think there is some merit in, with the appropriate safeguards in place, and I think this would only happen in very exceptional circumstances. But I think if a party to a code of conduct complaint could be shown to be acted unreasonably, then there should be a potential costs sanction in respect of that. I think there would have to be set criteria around that, but I think that could be useful. So one of the key elements, and this is at 3.8 of the report, is around the introduction of power of suspension. So members who have been members for a while prior to the 2011 Localism Act will remember that there used to be a power of suspension under a previous code of conduct regime. That was removed under the Localism Act. The government is now proposing that that is reintroduced with a maximum period of 6 months. Again, it's kind of, you could pick a figure out there, but to me, 6 months sounds a reasonable period to be an effective sanction. Again, I think this would only be in the most serious of cases. You know, going back over the code of conduct complaints that I've dealt with probably over the last 5 years, I can't think that any of them, or perhaps one of all the complaints I've dealt with, may have resulted in a suspension had that sanction been available. I think it will be a rarity, but I do think it would be an effective sanction to have available. Similarly, the withholding of allowances from suspended councillors, again, could be an effective sanction, and if they are suspended, then there is an argument that clearly perhaps they shouldn't be receiving and that their allowance whilst that period of suspension is taking place. There is also a proposal around disqualification of a councillor, and I think this is probably more controversial, and I think there are kind of pros and cons to this, certainly. I think it would be, I think if suspension is going to be rare, I think disqualification, because somebody has had 2 periods of suspension in a 5-year period, is going to be extremely, extremely rare. However, if you have got a member who is persistently misbehaving and is in effect not that bothered about it and by a period of suspension, then again disqualification could be an appropriate sanction, but I think it would be extremely rare. With both suspension and disqualification, I think it would be important that there is a right of appeal. They are obviously quite serious sanctions on members, and therefore I'd support the right of appeal in cases of suspension. So as I said, members, subject to any comments or anything today, I will send out an email to all members with a link to the consultation, inviting members to submit their own responses. But the recommendation, members, you note the response set out in Appendix 1, and the members also note the 26th of February deadline to submit your own individual responses.
Thank you, Mrs. Fax. Are there any questions or comments at all? Councillor Mrs. Allen.
When I was first here in the 1980s, I think there was a person who would have been disqualified even for the amount of shouting and fist waving. Nevertheless, thank you for what you've said. I think you've highlighted all the main points, and while that might be rare in this council, it is not rare in others. We have to bear in mind we're looking at regulation for everyone. And I do welcome the mandatory suggestion for parish councils as well. I think most parish councils have got standards, but I'm hearing this week of an example of outrageous behaviour in a parish council, and I do feel sometimes it's rarely used when it should be used more frequently. And I certainly feel from my own point of view that the judgment that's made in this council are fair and equitable. I would know this for myself, and that certainly makes a lot of sense to have this council in charge of this monitoring completely. because particularly for the parish council, it takes the onus away from the responsible officer completely. So thank you for what you've had to say. I think a lot of us will want to make some suggestion about suspension and disciplinary measures for people who do infringe on others' freedoms or act in ways which are not not suitable conduct for a person who's representing others. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think it's those of us that have been members for some time will recall we've had these reviews over and over again, and the biggest bone of contention is that issue about sanctions. We've all been, I certainly have been very disappointed every time where we thought that at last we'll get some teeth, sanctions would be applied, and it's not been supported by the government of the day, whatever colour government that is. But there are issues where the regime is used incorrectly. I know I can quote areas where we have believed that when there's been an election coming up, that there've been frivolous complaints to highlight actions or lack of actions of various councillors. But I think it does warrant a review again, and hopefully it'll be a sensible review and come out with some sensible outcomes. But as Mrs. Fagg says, we've got several ways of this. Mrs. Fagg has prepared a paper that we can support as a committee. We can go to council anyway, and we've also got the individual route that we can go. And I think, Mrs. Fagg, that I certainly have responded to an email that I had where there was some virtual workshops that we could take part in, and I think there were hour-long workshops that have been identified to give our views nationally in these workshops. So I would encourage members to do that wherever they can. So I open it up again, sorry, to questions and comments from members of the committee.
Following what you're saying, is it possible for this committee to endorse the report given by Mrs. Fowles to go forward on our behalf?
I believe we could do that, can't we, Mrs. Faggs?
Yes, absolutely. If members support it, then I will submit that response as monitoring officer, as I say, not stymieing any member from expressing a different view by their own consultation response.
Thank you. I mean,
Sorry. The question which came out to the parish councils was either for the clerk and any individual, was that the case? That was coming to you, or was it going to a national survey?
No, all responses have to be submitted via an online platform. So although it may have come out in a paper format to parishes, the only way to actually respond to the government consultation is via the online platform.
That goes straight to the government rather than to you to put into your report. That's right.
Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify, Lorraine? When we're talking about good practice, councillors outside of the chamber and what may or may not take place, is that covered by it? Because I don't want to go into it, but some people seem to know how far to go before they cross the line, shall we say? And so how would that deal with that sort of problem?
So the current code of conduct that we adopted in 2022, I think it was now, does have further clarity on when you are either acting with a councillor or appearing to act as a councillor. So if you are a reasonable member of the public would have the impression that you're acting in your capacity as a councillor, then you will be caught by the code of conduct. So kind of, if you like, location and time and that are less relevant to actually the impression you're giving. So the example I usually give in training is, if you're down the pub on a Saturday night and you're Gary and you're talking about the walls, then you're clearly not acting in your capacity as a councillor. However, if you're down the pub on a Saturday night and you introduce yourself as Councillor Burnett and you start talking about council business, then you are acting in your capacity as a councillor at that time. And therefore you would be caught by the code of conduct. So it depends, it's the actions rather than the location or things. Yeah. So it's, if you appear to be acting as a councillor, you will be caught by the code.
Any other questions or comments? Right, so can I take it that it is the wish of the committee for us to endorse Mrs Fax's report and to submit that on behalf of the committee? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, Councillor Allen. Yeah. Okay. You're just very favour. Thank you very much. Thank you then, Mrs Fax. You have the instructions and the support of this committee to submit that. But as we've said before, that doesn't prevent you from making your own personal submissions as well. Thank you. Can we move on to the next item? The report on work programme complaints, etc. Mrs Fax.
Thank you, Chairman. So finally, members, the normal update report. So as it says at 3.2, there are currently 3 active code of conduct complaints that I'm dealing with. They're at the initial assessment stage and none of them have been determined yet, but obviously I'll update members should they progress. Code of conduct training for parish councillors the sessions were held in September and October. Overall attendance of those sessions was low, which was disappointing. But a recording of the training session has been made available to all parishes, and I have asked parish council clerks to keep records of who views that training, so we can have an idea that hopefully the majority of parish councillors have either attended the training or at least viewed the recording of that training. Following the decision of the committee in September to introduce the annual review of the register of interest forms, I again contacted all parish clerks suggesting that an annual review process be introduced at parish level. Again, I can only suggest to parishes, I can't enforce, but that went out to all parish clerks. And Councillor Bond, as chairman of this committee, as you'll be aware, contacted all district councillors, encouraging a review of your forms as an interim measure before the May annual review comes in. And I have had a number of updates following that email. Moving on to the Ombudsman complaints, we've had 2 decisions from the Ombudsman. They are appended to the report. The first one was in relation to a planning matter, and although fault was found by the Ombudsman, no recommendations were actually made by the Ombudsman, as the council had, prior to that complaint being made, already implemented satisfactory improvements to its services to address the issues that were raised. The second complaint was in relation to a decision not to close a bridge on health and safety grounds. The Ombudsman declined to investigate that as there was sufficient evidence to find fault on behalf of the council to justify an investigation. We've had no complaints upheld at stage 2 so far this year, and again I'll report further on that at the next committee. In regard to data protection, as with all things, these things move on, don't they? So we've had no significant data protection breaches, is what it says in the report. Since writing the report, we have had 1 notifiable breach to the Information Commissioner's office, but I'm pleased to report that having made the report to the Information Commissioner's office, the Information Commissioner was satisfied that we'd acted appropriately and no further action was necessary. Finally, members, the work programme is set out at 3.7 of your report, and just confirm that with the addition of a few new items that on today's agenda we will be aware, we are on track to deliver the work programme as set out originally and agreed by the members earlier in the municipal year. So the recommendation is that members note the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs Fax. Are there any questions or comments at this stage on our work programme? Thank you very much for today. It has been quite a hefty meeting. We've had quite a lot of items on, some which were carried over and some which were new items. I think you'll note that the next meeting that we have in March has got a very light agenda at the moment. But I will say, as ever, if there are any topics, any subjects that you feel we should be discussing as a Standards and Resources Committee, then please bring them forward to either myself or Mrs Fax for our consideration and to include them on the agenda. But I do thank you for your input today. There's been some interesting questions, some very constructive questions and comments, and I'm sure that we can take that forward for the benefit of the council. So thank you once again, and I formally close the meeting.